Chapter 21 Sadhana Years in America. In March of 1950, Sri Subramania founded Muruga Ashram in Santa Cruz, California. He was eager to bring the Hindu deities to the West. Advised by his guru to wait until he was 30 to begin his mission, Sri Subramania spent the following 7 years in contemplation and inner pursuits, allowing his ordination and realization to mature. I followed Yoga Swami's instructions and returned to the United States and settled down to unfolding more and more. Until his death, he communicated with me year after year through Kandiya Chettiar. Upon returning to the U.S., the first thing I did was to change my name legally to my new Shaivite Hindu name, Subramunia. The judge took it in stride and quickly granted the request. Right after my ordination with Yoga Swami, the book Cognizant Ability began to unfold from within me. Little more is known of these years of contemplation, which were outwardly uneventful for the most part. Returning to Oakland, he connected again with Mother Krishni and in April began composing the first of the affirmations that would later be published as Cognizant Ability. He returned for at least 2 years to the world of dance, touring with New York's Metropolitan Opera in their production of De Fledermaus, which opened in Boston, then traveled through the East Coast and into Canada. While with the Met, he made his first radio and television appearances, performing bit parts, and became a member of the Screen Actors Guild and the American Guild of Variety Artists. He would speak of his months of travel, living out of a suitcase, spending days on long train rides through the countryside, training, practicing, performing, and earning $1,000 a month. He quit when the tour went to South America. There followed what he termed years of sadhana and solitude, spent mostly in the Southwest, New Mexico and Arizona. He supported himself teaching Indian and Western dance, Hatha Yoga, and Hindu Advaita philosophy, but his real work was the spiritual work, and he cherished his aloneness. In 1956, he migrated north into the pure mountains of Colorado, that are today the refuge of seekers and modern-day mendicants. His meditations deepened there. In December, he underwent a tremendous spiritual experience during deep contemplation, as the last of the outer self was displaced by the matured soul. He would later describe this event as the full actualization of the Svarna Sharira, in which the soul body displaces the outer self. At that time, the golden body of the soul completely inhabited the physical body, concluding the long climb up the spine to its permanent home in the crown chakra and the descent of the divine into the body. He later wrote, "The golden body, Svarna Sharira, is a body made of golden light. After many experiences of Parashiva, it gradually descends from the 7 chakras above the Sahasrara into the Ajna chakra, which then becomes the soul's Muladhara, then down into the Visuddha chakra, which then becomes its Muladhara, and then down into the Anahata, which then becomes its Muladhara. All 7 chakras above the Sahasrara slowly come down and down and down until the entire astral body is psychically seen by mystics who have this sight as a golden body. The astral body slowly, slowly, slowly dissolves into the golden body. That is what I have seen happen. That is what our parampara and our sampradaya know from experience. Experience is the only true knowing, a knowing that can be verified in books through others who have the same knowing, but a knowing that no others know, who have not had the same experience. To them it is only a concept, a nice one maybe, but just a concept or written off as an opinion. When the golden body fully enters the physical, having taken over the astral, the knowing that is known comes unbidden. It is beyond reason, but does not conflict with it. It is a living scripture, but does not conflict with those written by seers of the past who have been seen, and their records have become scripture. So great is the Sanatana Dharma that it defies all who doubt it, all who disdain it, all who disregard it, all who degrade it, with personal realization of its truth. This golden body, which begins to build into a golden body after the experience of Nirvikalpa Samadhi, is connected to the Sahasrara chakra. In other words, the Sahasrara chakra is the home base in the physical body for the golden body. There are 12 basic unfoldments to this chakra as the golden body grows. When the realized sannyasin travels in high states of contemplation, he moves freely in his golden body and can help and serve mankind. Over time, he gains a conscious control of the Sahasrara chakra as a force center which propels him into inner space. It is this golden body, as it refines and refines and refines itself within the Shiva Loka after moksha, that finally merges with Shiva like a cup of water being poured into the ocean. That same water can never be found and put back into the cup. This truly is Svarnasarira Vishvagrasa, the final merging with Shiva. Two superconscious encounters. After the Denver experience, Satguru Yogaswami began telling people in Jaffna, Hansen is dead. They thought it so until he wrote to Kandiya Chettiar from America a few months later to say that his mission had begun. Then the Jaffna Tamils understood that it was only his outer self that had died. Sri Subramania was alive and busy fulfilling the mission foreseen by Yogaswami. It was in Denver, the mile-high city in the Rocky Mountains, that the commentaries to Cognizant Ability were written, 7 years after the aphorisms were revealed. My external mind was learning to fully accept superconscious knowing, and the deeper inner mind was actively making itself the knower of the known. Oddly enough, one day the inner said to the outer mind to number each aphorism, which are now sections 1 and 2 of Cognizant Ability, and place them all face down on the floor. I obediently did this. Then, one after another, the commentaries were revealed, 3 words at a time with a significant pause between. The superconscious would dictate word by word to the conscious mind to be written down. Amazingly, it proceeded to dictate the commentary to number 7, then number 14, and so on. When all were done, the natural impulse urged me to turn over the aphorisms that were still face down on the floor, with a number on the back to see if the commentary matched the aphorism. It did. They all did. Truly, I became a more dedicated believer in the Jnana Marga, the aftermath of experiencing the beyond of the beyond of the beyond, which we call Parashiva, the fulfillment of the Yoga Marga. As the years passed by, one after another, this procedure of bringing unrehearsed wisdom through from the higher mind to the external became a natural part of my daily life, one of the tools of the trade, I have often said. These psychic powers sometimes take years to develop, but under the right circumstances, those carried over from a previous incarnation come immediately, of course, and are as much available as the availability to speak, listen, and feel. One of Sri Subramania's avid pursuits was the study of religious organizations to determine the most stable and workable vehicle for Shaivite Hinduism in Western culture and a technological age. He finally settled on the American church system. I was told by Yogaswami, don't really start to do anything until you are 30 years of age. You have to be more mature. Until then, I was to observe, have experiences, and learn. So I was sort of biding my time until I was 30 years of age. I went to Phoenix, Arizona, knowing that I would eventually get an organization going. Naturally, I wanted to know how to do that. So I went around to all the other organizations, Vedanta Society, the Rosicrucian Order, Paramahansa Yogananda's organization, and I analyzed all their problems. You know, you don't have to look at the successes because you are successful if you don't have problems automatically. I analyzed all their problems and all their faults and failings. As I traveled through the United States from the age of 23 to 30, observing the various schools, philosophies, and techniques given to aid people in philosophical and metaphysical thinking, I found that there was more philosophy and metaphysics than actual instructions on how to put it into action in your own life for spiritual awakening. The desire to fulfill that need directly began to grow and grow in me. I saw that the Western man needed a comprehensive, step-by-step, well-supervised method of study. This he was not getting. Those who did give a step-by-step training in metaphysics divided God and man and practiced techniques to put the pieces together. The philosophical division led man more to an unsettled frustration than to bringing forth his inner security. Fine teachers from the East came and taught, but didn't remain long enough for a continued, positive, direct supervision of the individual's unfoldment, either on an individual basis or organizationally. Finally, the time came to begin teaching, and I thought I would open the organization in Phoenix. So I went to the registrar of organizations and said, I would like to open this organization. What shall I do? He said, the thing to do is to go to a sign maker and get a sign. I said, "Any papers to fill out or anything?" He said, "No, this state welcomes spiritual activity. Just go get a sign." While I was waiting and deciding, I had another experience. One day while driving my small car, my inner self told my outer self, "Look at that sign. If any of you have been to Phoenix, you know it's totally a flat area, absolutely flat." There I was driving around this big flat area where there were lots of houses and homes. Look at that sign. Remember the sign. It was Spruce Street. I took note of the sign. Then I said, "Okay, I'm just going to get into my inner self." Inner self said, "Drive 20 blocks forward, turn left and drive 10 blocks. Turn right and drive 5 blocks. Turn left 2 blocks. Turn around, back up, go 10 blocks." And on like that for about 2 hours as I followed the instructions. Then it said, "Stop and look at the sign. Spruce Street." I was a believer in myself, an absolute believer in myself. After that, I went to San Francisco and started the organization there. I had given a little talk, and there were some people that were really interested. So I thought, well, how do I get it going? You need a lawyer, because California was different. You had to have papers and everything, tax exemptions and this and that. So where am I going to find a lawyer, I said. I know. I went to the FBI. I knocked on the door and I said, "I'm getting this organization going. Can you direct me to an attorney?" They referred me to the man who would be our attorney for several decades. He had me develop a file on my work for the FBI, saying then they would never worry about me. It was made quite clear to me that when I was 30 my students would start to come, so I waited. It happened just that way. This is how Himalayan Academy started in the United States in 1957. Settling in San Francisco. For a short time after leaving Phoenix, Sri Subramania taught yoga classes to students in Los Angeles, but soon he moved to San Francisco. He held the first applied yoga class in a small Bush Street apartment in downtown San Francisco. A few stories above the clatter of a noisy street, the first few eager students began the study of themselves and awakened a new world of inner awareness. He gave a talk at a small spiritualist church in the city to a group of elderly people, many of them women. In those days, yoga teachers were rare, and the subject was practically unknown. Theosophy was the fad of the day, and the healing work of Christian Science was in the ascendancy. On January 5, 1957, the occasion of his Jayanti, they asked him sincerely when he would begin to teach them. Right now, he replied. He explained he would work with them for a few months and see how they did. If all went well, if they practiced and benefited, he would continue. The average age of the first group of students was 50. For the most part, they were interested in psychism or spiritualism. Some had spirit guides and were interested in communication with the dead and other such phenomena. They were eager to know about healing with the mind, psychometry, alchemy, and seeing auras. These areas, which he had been studying and experiencing his whole life, became the topics of many of his talks. He also spoke of the cognizability aphorisms, taught the basics of concentration and meditation, color psychology, breathing, and the 5 states of mind, and gave instruction in hatha yoga and dance. His emphasis was always on self-realization and the possibility of man's awakening his own superconscious state of mind. Of course, the term superconscious was practically unheard of in those days. In April, Sri Subramania gave his blessings for a permanent center. The Sutter Street Temple was opened that month, with Sri Aramugam, then Ceylon's Minister of Agriculture, attending as the guest of honor. As a guru, I started with the basic philosophy of all gurus. To do nothing is the greatest thing on earth. Simply responding to the needs of the students, I founded a temple, as it was needed at that time to harness the religious forces of those who were unfolding. The students were enthused and supported the temple. Later on, they asked for written materials, such as a course of weekly lessons of my inspired talks and teachings, neatly arranged for those who couldn't attend the temple. I also responded to the needs of those who wished to be monastics and founded a monastic order. The monastics printed the lessons which today are the master course. During these formative years, Mother Christney brought her influence to bear. She dominated as a strong elderly matron might, skewing the teachings toward her background, Christian spiritualism. As her longtime student and her junior by 47 years, Sri Subramania supported her in this. He became the model of the spiritual leader she knew and idealized from her upbringing. Preceptor, counselor, preacher, confessor. When she chose to name the institution the Christian Yoga Church, he understood her reasons. Knowing the innate power of the press and having a lifelong affinity for the newest gadget and techie tool, he bought a mimeograph machine which was used for printing schedules, talks, and programs, as well as the first editions of his books Raja Yoga and Gems of Wisdom, the church's first publications. Sri Subramania learned to use the machine himself and then introduced it to his monks. Mimeograph was the office printing technology that preceded photocopiers. It was a paper stencil duplication device invented in the late 19th century and used through the 1980s. He would later tell his monks of cranking out tracts and pamphlets late into the night, hands stained with the bluish-purple dyes of a messy, smelly technology. It was the beginning of his lifetime of publishing, the first glimmerings of what would become a major part of his mission. The burgeoning group outgrew the Sutter Street building after 2 years and began looking for a larger place in the city for their chapel. Then an anonymous somebody put $1,000 in the little offering box, a lot of money in those days. I had rented a little place in which I had a vision of Shiva dancing on my head. I heard the drums and everything, and I saw a big door in that same vision. As soon as I saw the door on the Sacramento Street temple, I knew that was the place. It was to become the first Hindu temple in the United States. He used the $1,000 as a down payment on a building at 3575 Sacramento Street, a narrow 2-story apartment with a small garden in the back, not far from Park Presidio. The surrounding neighborhood, called Laurel Heights, was populated with apartments and small businesses, florists, restaurants, and small stores. It had been used as a photography studio and was in unsound condition. To meet the city fire codes, the building had to be almost totally renovated. His students spent the next year or two in karma yoga on the building, several hours a day and late into the evenings after leaving their regular jobs. In the end, they had created the first public Hindu temple in America. On its opening day in 1959, the temple hosted the world-famous Kandyan dance troupe of Ceylon, then on tour in America. An altar was established in the main hall, and 2 massive doors in the form of an archway were made. One entered from the street through the giant doors, past 2 purple velvet curtains, and into the small main chapel, complete with wooden pews, a rock altar and waterfall, and pulpit made of a single stone. From this pulpit each Sunday morning Father Subramania, as he was then known, gave sermons on yoga, the states of mind, and Hindu thought. He spoke of how to live well, how to awaken the inner light, how to overcome instinctive emotions and habits, and of spiritualism. Services were open to the public, though the upstairs was reserved for Father Subramania's residence and the church offices. The first floor garden rooms were used for personal counseling with devotees, a small kitchen, recording sessions, and for group activities. When the congregation had settled in its new home, Sri Subramania put forth the first sacraments and initiations. He founded a yoga order and initiated the first monastics to serve the congregation. He stressed the importance of establishing a steady routine for mission activities in the years to come, and stuck to that rule consistently, saying that would bring steady progress for everyone. To set the example himself, in the fall, Sri Subramania commenced the first sunrise service on Mount Tamalpai, a 2,500-foot peak in Martin County that offers a view of the northern San Francisco Bay Area. He took a vow to hold this monthly pilgrimage until his organization was 12 years old, at which time it would be well established. On the first Sunday of each month, and on other auspicious occasions, his devotees met at the temple for a pre-dawn blessing and the lighting of 108 candles. Crossing the Golden Gate Bridge and driving part way up the mountain in a convoy of cars, Sri Subramuniya led the 40-minute hike to the summit for a sunrise sermon and meditation. He continued this monthly Tirthayatra personally, rain or shine, for a dozen years, until he was out of the country, a total of 154 pilgrimages in all. Every Sunday we would make a pilgrimage there. We had a big rock on the mountain that we used to think of as a Shiva Lingam. That was a very routine time. It was easy for me to be routine because of being a disciplined person from the early ballet dancing training. I ran the institution consistently. Something was happening all the time, and it kept repeating itself. Sunday morning, the big day of the week, found the half-dozen monks cleaning the temple and preparing for the 11 a.m. service. They would stock the shelves with books, incense, and candles, which congregants loved to buy and take home. The temple held about 50 people and was almost always full, with people standing and sitting in the hallways. Sunday service was also held at 8 p.m. Hymns were sung, mystical ones written by the monastics under Father's guidance. He would enter the room through a door behind the altar, his tall frame and rich voice dominating the small room. He never spoke from notes, not once. It was pure spontaneity, what he would call from the inner sky. There would be a topic written dutifully on the sign outside the temple for all to see, but it was often a mere hint of what he would discourse on that day. Once he wrote the sermon's title, Was Christ a Yogi? It brought a larger than usual crowd, all wanting to know the answer. He began the sermon that day. Our topic today is, Was Christ a Yogi? Yes, he was. Now let me talk about the yoga that brings you into the inner light. Not another word about Christ. In fact, much of what he taught had to be filtered through the vernacular of the mostly Christian community. Many of those who came to listen called themselves Christian yogis. The United States then was a thoroughly Christian country. Hinduism was little known and even less understood. Therefore, almost all of the early students and members had strong Christian backgrounds. They were a breed of mystical Christian, those who did not follow the "my path is the only path" philosophy, but instead believed in a greater spiritual reality that was inclusive and tolerant. They found those values in the San Francisco Temple. They were quite comfortable learning about the Hindu religion. In order to avoid confusion or opposition, and to keep his Western devotees' transition into the Hindu religion gradual and rewarding, Sri Subramuniya kept the teaching simple and unramified. The early years were a time of constant classes, lectures, and counseling, for it was only through carefully educating the congregation that progress was made. There is a saying among the Buddhists of Sri Lanka, the teaching not adapted to the needs of the taught cannot be called a teaching. The wisdom of such an attitude was self-evident in the founding years. Despite his eagerness to present Shaiva Dharma exactly as he had absorbed it, while a member of the Orthodox Shaiva community of Jaffna, Sri Subramuniya was forced to be patient, carefully presenting through the years the universal principles of Hinduism through the teachings of Advaita and the science of yoga, and encouraging his devotees always in the practice of bhakti. During these early years, I gave forth much of the teachings that's in merging with Shiva, life the great experience, love is the sum of the law, the power of affirmation, and the river of life. All those talks that some of you have heard for many, many, many years started at that time. People started coming and going and going and coming, and I started seeing a new kind of life in the United States and adjusting myself to it. Sri Subramuniya had regular hours for personal counseling with members and participated in the many regular activities, always available to teach and answer questions. Gems of Wisdom, a book of his sayings, proved so popular that a second edition had to be printed in mid-1958. Sri Subramunia oversaw this and was busy besides preparing the first church manual, a compendium of vows, vestments, sacraments, disciplines, and schedules to guide the spiritual life of the congregation and monastics. To embody the busy routine of classes and studies of devotees and members, he founded the Yoga Institute, giving it several rooms in the San Francisco Temple. It was the forerunner of Himalayan Academy. He also initiated what came to be known as the Breakfast Club, a gathering held the third Sunday of each month when devotees and members could be together with him amid informal surroundings to chat and enjoy each other's company. It was quite popular, and a productive spirit came of it. Above all, Sri Subramunia saw to the smooth progress of his devotees in their devotions and spiritual disciplines. Consistency is the key to the conquest of karma, was his refrain. As his temple and activities thrived, challenges arose. Money was an issue. There was never enough. The consolidated financial statements for 1957 showed a total income of just over $3,000, not sufficient to manage such a growing institution. Yet he did manage. At one point, unhappy with the way funds were being taken from one budget to pay for another, he initiated a paper bag system. At the beginning of each month, he pinned 20 paper bags on the wall of the upstairs offices. Into each he placed the cash that could be spent on the bag's handwritten category: food, candles, travel, rent, etc. No one could spend for any item except from its paper bag. It provided a dramatic way to teach frugality to all who were responsible to control the spending. Stories were told of how the food bag would be empty on the 26th of the month, and everyone would virtually fast until the 1st. Of course, the system was too simplistic to survive for long. One of the students volunteered to take over the rudimentary accounting tasks. Soon, seeing how other churches supported themselves, Sri Subramunia introduced the idea of tithing, which was shockingly new to yoga students who had become used to getting by with a 10 or 15-cent donation every Sunday in the plate. One day he put a sign on the front of the temple: "Charge a tithe." Those were the early days of credit cards, and the idea was so creatively charming to popular journalist Herb Kine that he mentioned it in his "It's News to Me" column in the San Francisco Chronicle. Of monks and sermons. The first few monastics took initial vows at the same time that the temple was opened on Sacramento Street. They continued to work in San Francisco at their jobs, tithing 25% of their income. After their job in the city was finished for the day, they would join their guru in the temple, doing one thing or another until late in the evening, taking classes or helping with the public. In the 1980s, the Satguru commented, "The first brahmacharis and brahmacharinis began to appear in 1949 upon returning from Sri Lanka to America. However, no vows were given until 1957. This is when my Mahadashas changed from Rahu to Jupiter in December 1956. This began the order in a very serious way. We purchased property at what is now the Palaniswami Temple. Prior to this time, I had been traveling some, lecturing and teaching Vedanta, Siddhanta, and writing Raja Yoga, as cognizantability was also known, and other works. Temple worship was unheard of in the West in those days, as the Catholic Church, as well as the Protestant churches, had much of the nation held into its belief patterns. Sri Subramunia's Sunday sermons, called Inspired Talks, were dutifully recorded, transcribed, and printed each week by the monastics. After 2 years, the collected manuscripts were numerous. The basic philosophy and practice is clear, and demand for a study course growing. In 1959, Sri Subramunia and the monastics compiled and edited many of his talks into a course of lessons which could be issued by mail or in person. This was the first edition of his formal course of study called the Master Course. A decade later, speaking of his teachings during this period, he offered, "The theme of all these years was to present the teachings and practices in such a way where man is able to bypass what he thinks he is into what he really is, to become conscious of the power within the spine and the refined energies within that, and that within that, and that within that, until he realizes the self-God, the underlying principle which cannot be described, which is at a higher velocity than energy itself. Working on the matter-antimatter principle is the closest that science has come to explaining the realization of the self-God as presented in the Advaitist teachings and realized by myself and many of my close disciples. Realizing that in the West this theme did not penetrate the Western mind, I worked for many years developing a comprehensive study program, so this theme could be brought out clearly and precisely, not intellectually, but in the actual experiential patterns of an individual's life. Topics in those early lessons included the esoterics of man's bodies, the 5 states of mind, hatha yoga, mantra yoga, prana, concentration, meditation, and more. Published under the title World Fellowship of Yoga, the lessons were issued free of charge following the Eastern tradition. For the many students and members who lived too far from the temple to visit frequently, the lessons kept them in close touch and provided a way for their teacher to monitor their progress and offer guidance specific to their path. Sri Subramuniya often said, "The best of the East has met the best of the West," describing the nature of his work in the 50s. In 1971, he explained, "The best of the East is adhering strictly to the philosophy that the self-God is within man. Man can realize it fully within this life. That basically means opening the Sahasrara chakra and having awareness escape through the door of Brahman, merging with the self, or the Kundalini rising up through the various chakras through the spine, the pituitary and the pineal gland, merging in power and awareness, moving so deep within that it comes to the very core of being itself. This is the fundamental philosophy of the great rishis of the East, the philosophy that I have lived with since my studies there and to this day. Basically, the best of the West are the facilities for disseminating this teaching to the various levels of people on the path, the step-by-step organizational presentation leading one to his eventual goal without allowing him to digress in the presentation of the path. Sri Subramuniya and the monastics traveled frequently throughout California, lecturing, teaching Hatha Yoga and Raja Yoga, the Upanishads and other Hindu scriptures, and presenting the lessons of his World Fellowship of Yoga correspondence course that hundreds were enrolled in and studied daily. They spoke at colleges, in homes, and often in Episcopal or Unitarian church facilities whose doors were always open. They held summer camps for families and children, and in 1971 instituted a dynamic prison outreach program, visiting prisoners in their cells to teach Eastern ideals and the basics of yoga. Many inmates at Folsom, San Quentin, Vacaville, and other institutions found solace and a new awakening to spiritual life through these efforts. The Christian Yoga Church was formally incorporated in 1959. It educated members toward a progressively deeper understanding of Hindu beliefs and practices. At the same time, Sri Subramuniya trained the monastics in public speaking and had them give public classes in Hatha Yoga, the basics of meditation, and beginning philosophy as soon as they took their vows. He also encouraged them in selfless service by having them visit hospitals in the community periodically, consciously carrying a spirit of blessing and upliftment from the temple to those in distress. Later, he began Christian yoga study groups that they oversaw, held in family homes throughout California. On October 4, 1959, Sri Subramuniya flew to Hawaii, a personal retreat for himself and a forerunner of later Inner Search travel study programs. He visited only the island of Oahu, a rare time alone that allowed him to become acquainted with Hawaii, though a local newspaper ran an interview with him about his spiritual work on the mainland. On the evening of his departure from San Francisco, he gave an inspired talk in the temple to a small gathering of monastics and church members entitled The Self-God, explaining the goal and purpose of religious life. a spiritual classic that was immediately published by the monastics. It remains to this day one of the most lucid and inspiring Upanishads on the Absolute ever brought forth, a brief work that was lovingly known in Sri Lanka as the Little Gem. Here are the first 3 paragraphs. The self, you can't explain it. You can sense its experience through the refined state of your senses, but you can't explain it. To know it, you have to experience it, and the best you could say about it is that it is the depth of your being. It's the very core of you. It is you. If you visualize above you nothing, below you nothing, to the right of you nothing, to the left of you nothing, in front of you nothing, in the back of you nothing, and dissolve yourself into that nothingness, that would be the best way you could explain the realization of the self. And yet the nothingness would not be the absence of something, like the nothingness inside an empty box, which would be like a void. That nothingness is the fullness of everything, the power, the sustaining power of the existence of what appears to be everything. But after you realize the self, you see the mind for what it is, a self-created principle. That's the mind ever creating itself. The mind is form ever creating form, preserving form, creating new forms, and destroying old forms. That is the mind, the illusion, the great unreality, the part of you that in your thinking mind you dare to think is real. For 4 years the monks recorded Sri Subramunia's talks on a second-hand Wallensack reel-to-reel tape recorder, over 1,100 sermons and interviews in all. In 1960, he began a special series to be aired on the radio focusing on yoga in the West, positive attitudes, and practices for the inner man. Time was purchased from KBCO-FM 105.3, and the talks, called Temple of the Air, were broadcast each Sunday at 10 a.m. Sri Subramunia's persistent outreach efforts made the Hindu temple on Sacramento Street well known throughout the Bay Area. Laying down the law, the monks' training and service was going well as Sri Subramunia nurtured discipline, detachment, and relentless inner striving, balanced by their service to others as priests in the temple and in various capacities in the general community. He expected his monks to progress on the path and, in the process, to get along with each other. He was a strict teacher, and it became clear that he expected his directions to be followed. One day we were having a board of priests meeting, and some of the monks began arguing back and forth. I warned them that we could not have this happening again. Then on another occasion they started up again. I said, "Look, if this happens one more time, I'm going to have to stop these meetings." I don't think the monks believed me, but the next time it happened I said, "All right, that's it," and I never called another meeting of the board of priests. One day it was discovered that one of the monks had taken a few dollars from the day's offerings. He had grown hungry. He confessed, due to the sparse meals they could afford, that he had purchased extra food for himself. It was, for Subramunia, a minor tragedy which he would reference 30 years later as unacceptable behavior. He scolded the monk, first alone and then in front of the others, then required a severe penance to be performed. It was made clear to all the monks that even their own suffering was no excuse to break the bonds of trust. The order learned many such lessons and grew in strength and maturity. Some had difficulty obtaining the blessings or approval of their families to lead a renunciate life. A few families objected vehemently to their sons joining a completely unheard of and seemingly exotic order. One father stood knocking on the door of the San Francisco Monastery, insisting his son return home, calling him in a loud and desperate voice. In such cases, Sri Subramunia sometimes sent the monk back to live with his family for a time. Others he would send on mission, on the road, to be alone and reflect on their commitments. One young man was instructed to join the armed services for 2 years to work through his karmas. There were women in the congregation who saw the spiritual progress of their counterparts and pleaded to also be taken into monastic life. There were 3 of them in the beginning, and through gentle persistence they convinced Sri Subramunia of their deep devotion. In late 1960, he initiated them into monastic vows as the Sisters of Devotion. Like the monks, the nuns wore Western-style habits, austere, hooded brown robes with a white rope tied at the waist. They shaved their heads and looked much like the men, striving to be pure, spiritual beings, beyond gender, by balancing their feminine and masculine energies. Some mistook them for men. Their service revolved around the devotional services, the nurturing of families, and their own spiritual disciplines. They lived apart from the monks and came to the temple each day for classes and service. These Sisters of Devotion, who cleaned and cooked, counseled the women, brewed tea for temple visitors, handled mailings, and stocked the little bookshelf, brought a tangible sense of caring, which was called the Mother Spirit to Sri Subramunia's mission. In 1961, the church purchased a house in Glendale, a suburb of Los Angeles, dedicating it as the Glendale Monastery for the three mother nuns. Sri Subramunia gave them the mission of service and silence. To strengthen the families, Sri Subramunia wrote the Catechism of the Christian Yoga Church, outlining the fundamental principles of religious life and the philosophical and theological doctrines of the Church. He began regular home services and meditations to be observed mornings and evenings by the families in their shrine rooms. 7 holy weeks were designated, 7 periods around the year of special sadhana and spiritual striving, fasting and reaffirmation of commitment to the inner path. Each Holy Week was dedicated to a great saint or important religious festival and corresponded to one of the 7 chakras of the subtle body of man. These would become the annual focus of more intense spiritual work for all of his followers. Following on his study of the American church system and numerous religious organizations in the U.S., Sri Subramunia decided in late 1961 that he would file for official designation as a church from the Internal Revenue Service. On February 12, 1962, the IRS sent form approval of his church's tax-exempt status. It was the first American church teaching Hinduism to be so acknowledged. The church summarized its mission in a press release. Father Subramunia's teachings have reached students in India, Ceylon, England, Germany, South Africa, and even West Africa. He says Christian yoga answers the questions, who am I? Where did I come from? Where am I going? Members of the church learn how to explore the depths of their inner being, to find these answers through concentration and deep meditation. While his outer life was immersed in the founding of his mission and the training of his monks, Sri Subramunia's inner life grew even more intense and profound. It would prove a challenge to him to balance the two. He had come to this earth, he would later say, to do the inner work of realization, and equally he had been prepared from childhood to lead a spiritual renaissance, to bring the mystical truths to those ready for them. But those two aspirations, each enormous, did not always sit well with each other. There were times, he said, when he had to give a sermon on some mundane subject, while his superconscious state of mind was soaring in another realm. To function in the outer world, he had to bring himself down to earth, work hard to regain a normal perspective on life, so he could speak with others, guide them, inspire them. The reclusive mystic yogi in him was, for a time at least, at odds with the founder of a spiritual institution. Through all that, he remained determined to make both of these goals work in his life. Mystics do not always have an easy time living in the world. Functioning sometimes is extremely difficult because, though apparently they become sensitive, they also become stronger in all of their various other senses. Sensitivity cannot in any way be equated with being weak. Mystics do, however, become very different than other people. In the early 1960s, I went through a very difficult time functioning in the world because I was working intently with the unfoldment of a large number of students. Every time I picked up something that was heavier than a piece of paper, my arms and hands would turn to light, and instead of seeing the physical body, I would see the inner body. If I were to carry a book or a chair, first my hands would turn to light, then the light would creep up my arms and down my legs, and the body would start fading away invariably. This went on for about 6 years of my life. During this time, even a piece of paper was heavy. It was even difficult to wear a wristwatch because then that arm would turn to light. I would be more conscious of this beautiful light arm that looked like crystal plastic than it would be of other things. I would love to watch it, all scintillating in energy. It was just lovely. Even while driving a car, it was great fun because each time I pressed my hands hard on the steering wheel, my whole body would start turning into light, and I would start to see the most dense areas of the car in front of me, which was just the chassis part. All the top part and the people would fade away. I would only see the heaviest types of metal. A mystic can really live in a wonderful world if he prefers. Now I can be in this state if I want to. It is voluntary. It's not an involuntary state anymore. I remember once while in that state, I had to put the garbage can out on the sidewalk, and there was no one to carry it. I had a terrible time. I would get the can just so far and turn all to light and have to put it down again. Finally, with great effort, I got it out. It seemed like a long way. During this time, if the phone rang, it sounded so loud, and it was just a terrific thing to pull the physical elements together again so that I could answer it. Mark Twain's favorite brewery. Following a 1962 summer retreat at Angora Lake, Sri Subramunia visited nearby Virginia City, Nevada, to find a piece of property that could serve as a permanent retreat center. He didn't have to look far. About a quarter-mile down the canyon from his legendary boomtown of the Old West, he found a large ramshackle brewery, originally built in 1864, on the site of the famed Comstock Lode Gold Rush. It was for sale. Its austere Sierra Nevada mountain terrain, with its sagebrush and pinyon-style landscape, something that might intimidate others, was appealing to him. It was yogic, almost desolate. It was a place where the inner was more important than the outer. His first thought when he stepped inside was, what a wonderful ashram this would make. He wandered through its cavernous rooms on 3 floors, and despite the dilapidated condition of the landmark, he arranged to purchase it. The building, known as the Old Nevada Brewery, was the favorite haunt of American humorist Mark Twain. Samuel Clemens, Twain's real name, was first a writer and then the editor of the Territorial Enterprise in Virginia City from 1862 to 1864, a time during which he wrote his famed novel Roughing It. Each afternoon, it is said, he took refuge in the beer gardens of this biggest and most popular pub, telling tall tales to rowdy miners. And there were large crowds. In those days, Virginia cities with 30,000 people was nearly half as populous as San Francisco due to the gold rush, which brought people from all over the world to the Wild West to dig into the sage-covered hills. The landmark had been a silent memorial for half a century when Sri Subramunia, the new owner, stepped into its brick and fancy woodwork rooms. Its age was showing. The resident caretaker was a grizzled old prospector who kept his mule in the basement and a pig in the shower. He was hard of hearing and required more than a little convincing that his residence had indeed changed owners. Church families adopted the ashram at once, like parents embracing an orphaned child, pouring their hearts and souls and their money into it, the rest of that summer to bring it up to Sri Subramunia's standards. Several monastics stayed as caretakers through the snow-throttled Nevada mountain winter, and plans for major renovations were made for the spring. The ashram became the Skandamalai Monastery, also called the Mountain Desert Monastery, reflecting Sri Subramunia's insight that Murugan, Skanda, is the Lord of Renunciates, who would be its residence. It would be home of Comstock House, a major publication and printing facility, and the new center for the burgeoning Himalayan Academy courses and programs. For years, at this remote and desolate mountain eyrie, 6,400 feet above sea level, Sri Subramunia would train his renunciates and issue forth the teachings of Vedanta, Siddhanta, and the Shaivite religion through literature, travel programs, seminars, and courses. The chemical chaos of LSD. American television and magazines showed the world the first hippies and flower children in 1964. As the psychedelic movement and drug era reached its stride, its mecca was a tiny, previously unremarkable neighborhood in San Francisco called Haight-Ashbury, just over a mile from the Sacramento Street Temple. Because of the nationwide news coverage given to the hippie movement, and this distinct young people from across the U.S. began pouring into the area. Because of the nationwide news coverage given to the hippie movement and this district, young people from across the U.S. began pouring into the area. It was a curious feature of the birth of the drug era in America that no one quite took it seriously until it was almost too late. When Sri Subramuniya saw the number of youths arriving in the city and the continuing national news coverage, he arranged a meeting between the mayor's staff and representatives of the various religions and social workers who were ministering to the problem. As a result, the San Francisco Chronicle carried a series of stern articles by the mayor and others warning young people intending to migrate to the city for the drug culture to stay away. In the early years of the hippie movement, no one in America knew quite what to make of it. Sri Subramuniya was well aware of its inner implications and dangers and spoke out against it, but even he had not foreseen how it would mushroom out of control across the country. The first time that I learned of LSD, shortly after it was discovered by recreational users, I went to the Menlo Park Clinic to find out something about it. I talked with one of the psychiatrists there, and he began explaining these different experiences one might have on this drug. I said to him, some of these experiences you describe, spiritual revelations, expanded awareness, blissful and brilliant inner experiences, are the ones I have had every day of my life for the last 20 years through the faculty of meditation. He responded, well, you are fortunate, aren't you? The crisis had its influence on the church. As the year progressed, the number of odd-looking visitors to classes and services increased. For several years, the American guru would counsel thousands of LSD users. His primary point was not that drugs are wrong, but that there is a better way, an ancient, natural, and proven way to achieve mystical experiences. Gently, he encouraged young men and women to abstain from all drugs and instead to undertake the disciplines of yoga. The trouble with drugs, he told them, was that even if drugs stimulate such experiences, they provide no foundation or understanding of them, no way to repeat the experience or benefit from it. Nothing is gained for the damage done to the nerve system and mind. His words were never accusatory, and they had special power, for he knew personally the profound states of mind they had experienced and told him of it. He had been there, they could see, so they trusted his counsel. Sri Subramuniya's meditations on this social upheaval, whose epicenter was in his city, led to a talk in the temple called Chemical Chaos, an exposition and criticism of the psychedelic movement and its philosophy. He directed the monks and adult counselors to do what they could to relieve the human suffering caused by the use of drugs, and he helped a great deal to spread an understanding of the nature of the problem among the city's ministers and others. In the early 60s, I became conscious that more and more of the people who came to me for counseling wanted to talk over aspects of their experience in higher states of the mind that had been opened through psychedelic experience. Their interest was in relating these experiences to yoga and the consciousness attained through meditation. These people were highly enthusiastic about their new world, for it seemed like sort of a canned meditation, something they could get very quickly without entering into the sometimes tedious yoga training that may take years to open the individual to the within of himself. People all over the nation now are becoming awakened to the world within. I have interviewed seekers who have had a few psychedelic experiences and have come through them more vibrant, more alive, and more ready to face the challenges of a new world. I have met others who only stand and look at you blankly, who have lost their desire, even their self-respect. They have lost, shall we say, the structure through which their mind force previously flowed, and it has not been replaced. I don't want to see a nationwide or worldwide movement built around a little bit of acid. I don't want to see this because of the young souls for whom this would be devastating. Some young souls who have been opened up without preparation stumble into psychic ability. They may read thought forms, see auras, or travel astrally. In yoga, we would say that this path of psychism must be avoided until you have attained self-realization. This is because in opening up the mind to higher forces and beautiful experiences, we also open ourselves up to the unpleasant experiences of the shadow world, of the chakras below the Muladhara Center at the base of the spine, areas of consciousness which we cannot control without preparation and training. In yoga, the guru knows how to protect his students in the opening up process by closing off the lower realms as the higher ones open. He knows how to do this, but it is a steady training and does require time. I have met people who have had the psychedelic experience who cannot walk down the street past certain houses because they have become so sensitive to the contention, the negative force field emitted from a certain home. Some of these people are opened up to the more subtle forces of the lower mind. I believe that the gap which has been created between turned on people and turned off people can best be bridged through meditation, gaining control of the mind so that the individual can become master of himself. When you become master of yourself, you truly stand alone in completeness, not in loneliness. In doing so, you are able to bring forth knowledge and wisdom from yourself through the process of meditation, through being able to sit down and think through a problem, ultimately seeing it in full superconscious perspective and bring forth an answer, a workable answer filled with life. Meditation is a dynamic process. It is much more than just sitting around and waiting. It creates a highly individualistic type of mind. In early 1967, he arranged to meet with Dr. Richard Alpert, who, along with Dr. Timothy Leary, had become a kind of LSD evangelist, urging American youth to tune in, turn on, and drop out. The meeting was arranged by a young monk who accompanied Sri Subramania. Over a spaghetti dinner in a Berkeley apartment, they discussed the illuminating and sometimes devastating states of mind provoked by LSD. Sri Subramania told him that the higher planes were open to souls who reached them through normal means, but when unqualified people began to show up astrally using drugs, the devas closed all doors. Sri Subramania alerted him to stop what he and Timothy Leary were doing right away. Any souls using drugs would be caught in the lower astral plane, unable to expand their consciousness. The errant former Harvard professor, who had taken LSD hundreds of times, leaned forward and listened most intently when, toward evening's end, Sri Subramania gave stern warnings of the karmas he was creating by putting all these young lives at risk. Alpert was entreated firmly to desist, and though he did not say he would, that conversation may well have led to his life-transforming journey to India, where he became a devotee of Neem Karoli Baba, who gave him the name Ramdas, and his change of mind soon thereafter when he publicly spoke against LSD. Also in 1967, the founder of ISKCON, Vaishnava Guru Swami Prabhupada, took up residence in San Francisco, establishing a small Krishna temple on Frederick Street on the edge of the Haight-Ashbury district. Sri Subramania, as he always did, visited, welcoming the spiritual master from India and offering help getting established in the West. Members regularly took boxes of fruits and grains to help feed Swami Prabhupada's followers. He would regale Sri Subramunia's followers with long stories from scripture, and he once visited the Sacramento Street Temple, giving a short upadesha and leading bhajan. In other days, through the years, Sri Subramunia assisted Hindu leaders seeking to establish themselves in America, such as loaning his attorney to Swami Chinmayananda when he needed help incorporating the Chinmaya mission in the U.S., taking charge. Through the 1950s and early 60s, Mother Krishni played a significant role in the church. At the Sacramento Street Temple, she served as head of the Order of Nuns and, as an elder, stood strongly behind Sri Subramunia. One devotee recalls his own early days in the congregation. Mother Krishni was then 83 years old. During Sunday church activities, she attended by sitting in a little room behind the altar while Subramunia gave his sermons. At times, she would lecture me and other newcomers about her life and times. She always supported Sri Subramunia with such sayings as, "Obey your guru, obey your guru, obey your guru," and "Your guru will show you the way to your spiritual destiny." At the same time, Mother Krishni remained a bastion of Christian influence. As she grew more senior in years and he came into his full authority as a Hindu guru, she attempted to make administrative changes in the church. Her efforts failed, and in 1967, with the onset of senility, she left the congregation, retiring to live with her son. Sri Subramania, now solely responsible, set about removing all vestiges of her mystical Christianity from the order's teachings and redefining his organization as fully Hindu. Chapter 22, Moving to Nevada. On March 24, 1964, the great Satguru Yoga Swami of Jaffna attained Mahasamadhi. Kandia Chettiar sent photographs of the cremation rites within days, rites attended by enormous crowds. Sri Subramunia was visited by Yoga Swami inwardly. Soon thereafter, a power swept through the American Shishya, and he seemed to take on a new force of spiritual authority. His devotees saw what was happening and began calling him Master Subramunia, a name he would make legal years later. He spoke of that time. Yoga Swami passed from his physical body in March 1964. After this happened, I began receiving letters from Ceylon saying, "You have to come back now because we need you as the guru here," indicating that I was his successor. I felt that my mission was in the West. Master named 1965 the year of the Academy. His mission was in the ascendancy, and he longed to develop his property in Nevada as a remote retreat for himself and his monks. He began to make the 4-hour drive from the San Francisco temple to the ashram more often, sometimes weekly. Seeing the need, members leased for him a black Cadillac. Nevada had no speed limits in those days, and he drove those remote roads himself, seldom exceeding 80 miles per hour. It was for him a meditation, the wild, wild west. The mountain desert monastery was to become Master's spiritual home and his publication center. It was just a quarter-mile from the center of a cowboy town of 600 redneck mountain boys and their families. The wooden boardwalks from 100 years earlier were still used, and the Bucket of Blood saloon opened early in the day. The heyday was long gone, and the opera house was a shell of its former self, but the town survived, barely, on a trickle of tourists who made the 24-mile drive uphill from Reno. They would gamble a bit, buy some trinkets, drink a beer, and have their pictures taken in front of a wooden Indian. The locals did not know what to think of Master and his San Francisco yogis who had bought the famed brewery. It took a year to get acquainted. Locals did this by crossing to the other side of the street whenever the monks came to town, which they did daily to fetch the mail from the post office. They did it also by racing their motorcycles past the ashram and screaming foul language to intimidate the monks. It was a clash of cultures. Master thought hard about how to make this work. In the end, he bought cowboy boots, a hat and bolo tie, and worked to befriend the locals. He would visit their businesses, buy their services, and talk their language. It worked, mostly. Still, the raucous motorcycle welcome wagon continued. So he directed one of the monks, an ex-paratrooper with firearms training, to buy a shotgun. When the bikers made their next dust cloud foray down 6 Mile Canyon Road, the monk opened a second-story window and let fly 2 12-gauge shots over their heads. Communication is a wonderful thing. The drive-bys ceased, and a new respect for the monks seemed to emerge. The monastery had to deal with another side of the local culture. Nevada is the only state in the Union where prostitution remains legal, and the most famous brothel in the state was just a few miles away. More than once, a shaven-headed monk would open the door only to be asked most embarrassing questions. They soon learned to discreetly direct inquirers a little farther down the road. Young men came from all walks of life, all parts of the country, to serve and learn from this living yoga master who understood the superconscious states of mind they had glimpsed. The monastery grew as the most ardent and qualified came forward, eager to follow the monastic path. 20, then 30 and more. They slept on the dining room floor, the shed floor, in the hallways, the attic, and the back porch, any place a sleeping bag would fit. The guru welcomed them all, thereby setting himself an enormous work, for those young men in their early 20s, for the most part, came with all the things immature men have: bad habits, heavy karmas, personal preferences, combative natures, sexual longings, unfulfilled desires, experiences suffered, lack of discipline. So their guru began the work of training them how to dress, how to walk and converse, how to work with others, how to eat at the table and answer the phone. He gave them projects to harness their youthful enthusiasm. For this, the publication served well. Master bought out a printing business in Oakland and had all its equipment, a functioning shop, moved to Virginia City. There it was set up under the care of the monastics on the ground floor of the building, with the presses and paper cutter in the brick-walled room that had served as the town's Pony Express station in the days of the Old West. Monks were sent to printing school in Angwin, California, to become apprentice pressmen, typographers, and darkroom photographers. By 1968, the ashram became a humming, productive, professional printing and publishing center. Master Subramania turned out one small book after another, and the monks worked day and night to print and bind them. When exhaustion came, they crawled into sleeping bags at the foot of a Heidelberg press, only to rise again in a few hours, brew a pot of coffee, and print until the sun came up. Master founded Comstock House, a publishing company, and through it the books swept across the nation, becoming some of the most popular spiritual writings of their time. The Clear White Light, The Fine Art of Meditation, Everything is Within You, On the Brink of the Absolute, The Lotus of the Heart. One and then another came off those presses. Word spread of the monks' skills, and soon the Nevada casinos were offering printing work, keno cards, restaurant placemats, corporate stationery, and more, which, accepted for a time, helped the monastery support itself, pushing the monks to perfection. Despite all the publishing activity, it was the inner work that was central at the monastery, and Master Subramunia set a demanding meditation schedule, 4 times a day at 6 a.m., noon, 6 p.m., and midnight. He ascended the narrow wooden steps to the spacious third-floor loft where the monastery temple had been established, and there, without fail, all the monks would assemble for a full hour's guided meditation. Babaji, the ashram's golden retriever, never missed a session, curled up at Master's feet. It was known to all that one could not miss a meditation. Master would be there without fail, and each and every monk would too. The meditations were conducted in full lotus position, and it was unspoken but understood that no one was to move a muscle. One monk had difficulty enduring these long sessions day after day. His legs would cramp, and he could hardly keep his mind on the meditation. So one day, before the hour was called, he reached down to untangle his legs and relieve the strain. Master said simply, "Don't," directing him to stay in the lotus position until the end. The next day and the next, the same thing happened, until the young monk began to silently weep as he fought to keep his body still. Master took him aside and explained it was important for him to overcome this obstacle if he was serious, if he wanted a life of meditation. Master urged him to change his way of perceiving the pain, to see it as energy, as sound instead of pain. He said, "See yourself sitting on that sound as if sitting on a symphony. Try that." He did, and after some days the pain subsided. The body made the needed adjustments, and he could sit still without discomfort. Such calls for willpower, for overcoming difficulties, whether physical, emotional, intellectual, or karmic, came often from Master. Once, when trying to teach the monks how to control the heat of the body, he saw they were not getting it. So he moved the 6 a.m. meditations outside. It was winter, and the high mountain snows drifted deep, so deep that in some years one could walk out a second-story door onto the ground. That year was particularly cold. Each morning the monks followed their guru through the newly fallen snow to an open spot where they meditated together. They had only their robes and a woolen blanket to keep them warm, and these were pitiably inadequate. As the morning wind swept snow and frozen air past their defenses, they sat in full lotus, shivering and seeking the silence within. The guru would then guide them to warm their bodies with their minds, to bring up the heat of the body, which in his Shum language is called Alikai Shum. The monks worked with feverish intensity to learn the art their guru had put before them. This was no longer an exercise, it was a matter of survival. After some weeks, most had learned to raise their body temperature mentally, not because they wanted to, but because they had to. Such was the way of the guru in those days. Such training was intense for all the monks, as the Guru took them through the personal transformations needed, the changes in their attitudes and their relationships, the resolutions of their past, the firming up their work habits and meditative determinations. He taught them willpower, how to accomplish their goals, how to overcome obstacles, how to turn adversity and obstacles into success. In everything they did, he asked 108%. 100%, he often repeated, is not enough, is not what you are capable of. Under this intense scrutiny and guidance, the monks flourished in their inner and outer lives, so much so that decades later the Satguru would wonder aloud whether monks of succeeding generations would develop the same tenacity and strength as his first group had. From Virginia City, Master wrote this response to a seeker: "Namaste, your lovely letter arrived just as I returned to the monastery today from our India Odyssey pilgrimage to my ashram in Alavedi, Sri Lanka, and 8 other countries. That good timing indicates that you are on an inner beam, no doubt from the efforts already expended in your spiritual quest. From your letter, it is certain that you have exhausted the many dead-end trails on the path. Your decision to be a renunciate monastic is a good one. It is a big step, and I know you have thought it over well. Times are changing. Dedicated souls like yourself are needed as helpers on the path in our monastic orders to stabilize and teach those who are seeking. It is time now for the Western mind to rediscover the vast teachings of Shaiva Siddhanta Hinduism. I am going to give you the first of many challenges we may share together in this life. It is to meditate deeply every day for 1 full month on a talk I once gave to a small gathering of Madhavashis, monks at the San Francisco Temple. In fact, it was August 28, 1960. Like you, they were beginning to experience the blissful and peaceful areas of their inner being, and we spoke of enlightened insights one has on the very brink of the Absolute. You will be challenged by this assignment. Remember, the rewards are more than worth the effort required. It is my duty as your spiritual teacher to assure you that there will be trials. The sannyasin's life is not easy. It will demand of you more than you ever thought possible. You will surely be asked to serve when tired, to inspire when you feel a little irritated, to give when it seems there is nothing left to offer. To drop out of this great ministry would not be good for you or for those who will learn to depend on you. A Hindu monastic order is not a place to get away from the world. You must teach us and yourself to depend on you so that 20 or 30 years from now, others will find strength in you as you fulfill your karmic destiny as a spiritual leader in this life. Therefore, read carefully these words, weigh your life, and consider well where you wish to devote your energies. The goal, of course, is self-realization. That will come naturally. A foundation is needed first, a foundation nurtured through slow and arduous study, through sadhana performed and the demands placed by the Guru upon the aspirant. This is a wonderful crossroad in your life. Do not hurry into it. Do this assignment, and should you wish a more disciplined and intense training, do sadhana. Settle your affairs of the world, then we can sit together. Love and blessings, Master. There is a cave down 6 Mile Canyon Road, perhaps a mile beyond the monastery, one of the hundreds of abandoned silver mines that honeycomb the region's hills, but horizontally deeper than most. One can walk for half a mile into its chambers. When Master discovered the cave one day, he was thrilled and immediately set up a program for his monks.